Alright, what's going on guys? Zack here, bringing you guys another video, and today we're going to be doing another video about Bleach's insane foreshadowing. Just like the last video, I'm going to go over 4 or 5 things that got foreshadowed in the early story, and if there's still more for me to talk about, I'll make another video. So as I said, we've got 5 moments to talk about in this video, so let's get started. So as I said in the last video, some of these might be reaches, but I've talked most of them out with one of my friends who's also a Bleach fan, so I'm willing to put them in this video, even if they are reaches. Okay, now that I'm done with whatever I was trying to do with this part of the video, let's get into our first foreshadowed moment. Alright, so our first moment has to do with everybody's favorite shop owner, Kisuke. It also has to do with this man's Bankai, Kennon Barake Benehime Aratame. You see, when Kisuke unveils this thing during the 1,000-Year Blood War, we learn that it has the ability to reconstruct anything that it touches. Now you might wonder how its abilities were foreshadowed, and they actually were, very, very subtly, during the Urahara arc. During the Urahara arc, there's a point in it where Chad asks Kisuke to train him so he can fight alongside Ichigo again, just like old times. Kisuke is surprised that Chad would ask him to train him, but he accepts and they train together. Well, Renji trains with Chad so he can make his masturbation arm stronger, and when Renji asks Kisuke why he has to be the one to train Chad, Kisuke says this. Kisuke tells Renji that his Bankai isn't really suited for training or giving other people strength. The only reason that he actually needs Renji to train with Chad is because the power of a Bankai is the only thing that'll make him strong enough to fight the Urahara threat. Well, Kisuke tells Renji that his Bankai isn't really suited for training, and that's exactly what we learned during the 1,000-Year Blood War when he uses it. Just imagine Chad training against Kisuke's Bankai down in Kisuke's underground bunker. This man Chad is just running around getting rearranged no matter how physically strong he becomes. So that's our first foreshadowing moment for this video, but we still got 4 things to talk about, so let's keep going. Next up is how Ginjo was actually foreshadowed by Ichigo's interaction with Ukitake at the end of the Soul Society arc when Ukitake gives Ichigo his Deputy Soul Reaper badge. So at the end of the Soul Society arc, right before Ichigo left to the world the living, Ukitake gave Ichigo something called a Deputy Soul Reaper badge. Ichigo of course has no idea what this is, so Ukitake explains it in the next chapter. Ukitake actually says that the Soul Society does acknowledge Deputy Soul Reapers from time to time, and whenever they end up doing that, it's always been tradition to give them this badge. Ishida is immediately skeptical of this, and this is just a tiny hint of what's to come. Well, Ichigo goes to school the next day, and we learn about more of the stuff that this badge can do. This badge can transform Ichigo into his Shinigami form without him needing Rukia's little soul-stealing glove. It also hides itself from normal humans that can't already see things like pluses, Shinigami, and hollows, and finally, it can detect when there's a hollow in the area, so Ichigo doesn't need Rukia's little flip phone to know when a hollow's in the area. These are just some attributes of the badge. They don't really have much to do with the foreshadowing, but I think it's at least important to give you guys a little refresher on what it can do. Anyway, one thing that it can't do is verify his identity to other Soul Reapers, the one thing that you would think it could do. We learn this when Ichigo tries to show it to the new Soul Reaper stationed in Karakura town, Zenosuke Kurumadani. I never actually learned this guy's name until now, and I already know that I'm gonna struggle pronouncing it. Anyway, Ichigo shows Zenosuke his Deputy Soul Reaper badge, and it turns out that he's never even heard of something like that. This is just another small hint of what's to come. Nothing much really happens with the Deputy Soul Reaper badge until the Fullbring arc. This is when we meet our boy Ginjo for the first time, and Ichigo actually gets his bag back from a thief. When Ginjo gets his bag back, however, we see that he also had a Deputy Soul Reaper badge inside of it. This immediately should have told me that Ginjo was connected to Shinigami, but I fumbled the bag the first time that I read this because I thought that this panel was showing Ichigo's badge for some reason. Anyway, Ichigo then has a dream where some of his Soul Reaper friends talk to him through the badge, and then his whole Fullbring power is based around it, so this badge has some huge significance in this arc. We then get the whole Ginjo betrayal thing, and in Ichigo's fight with Ginjo, we learn the true nature of Ichigo's Deputy Soul Reaper badge. It turns out that the badge's actual function is monitor and control. They gave Ichigo this badge so they could locate Ichigo whenever they wanted, and so they could control his spiritual pressure. So it turns out that the Soul Society didn't have the best intentions when they gave Ichigo that Soul Reaper badge, and the same thing happened with Ginjo in the past. Ishida was actually concerned about this possibility back in chapter 182, but he didn't say anything, and that's what led to the fight with Ginjo. Wow. So yeah, the Deputy Soul Reaper badge was fishy from the very beginning and actually foreshadowed our boy Ginjo, who used to be a Deputy Soul Reaper before he was betrayed by the Soul Society. Alright, the next thing that we're going to talk about is the thing in the thumbnail, and that's the fact that there were hints at Unohana's true nature as the first Kenpachi from way before it was revealed in the 1000-Year Blood War. So as you know, if you've read or watched the 1000-Year Blood War, it's revealed that Unohana isn't just a nice, friendly healer. She's actually one of the most violent people in the entire Soul Society and the first person to hold the Kenpachi title. This was a pretty crazy reveal, but was the writing on the wall for it the entire time? Well, if I'm talking about it in this video, that probably means that it was, so let's get into it. Our first indication of this actually takes place during chapter 180 at the end of the Soul Society arc. So this is right after Aizen did his whole Chad villain shtick and betrayed the Soul Society. Some members of the 11th Division are getting healed after the battle, but they're getting a little rowdy, trying to leave before Unohana says it's okay. This is when Unohana puts her hands on one of their shoulders and makes this face. This of course creeps this member of the 11th Division out, but try to remember what the 11th Division is. The 11th Division is a group of Soul Reapers that fight under the complete menace to society, Kenpachi Zaraki, and are only allowed to fight using physical strength. Zanpakutos with hacks abilities like Yumichika's are frowned upon, so they've got to be really tough to make it in the division. With that being said, Unohana with a single face and the phrase, "Please remember that while you are under this roof, your lives are in our hands," scares this member of the 11th Division so badly that him and his other 11th Division buddy quite literally wilt away in fear. Now that's a really small thing, but it's a lot of small things built up that could have tipped us onto Unohana's true nature. The next piece actually comes from the flashback before the fight with Aizen and his forces, chapter 315.1 if you read on Viz, and chapter -108 if you read anywhere else. This scene doesn't really show Unohana's violent nature in the manga, but it does in the anime. Here in the manga, we actually learn about how Unohana has been a captain for even longer than Shunsui and Ukitake, who were both nurtured into becoming Soul Reapers by Yamamoto himself. In this conversation, Shunsui almost forgets to mention Unohana when talking about the captains of the Gotei 13 that have been captains for over 100 years, and Ukitake says something really interesting in response. When Shunsui forgets Unohana, Ukitake tells him right away and then says, "I wouldn't let her find out that you forgot." Now this struck me as interesting because this is Shunsui that Ukitake is talking about. You know, the guy that's gonna take over as Captain General of the Gotei 13 in 100 years. So for Ukitake to say something like that should have clued us in that Unohana was pretty dangerous. Her being in the Gotei 13 longer than even Shunsui and Ukitake also foreshadows something else really interesting, and that's the fact that Unohana is actually a founding member of the Gotei 13 alongside Yamamoto and all his goons. She used to be in the Gotei 13 when it was nothing less than a brutal mob of killers according to Yuha. So yeah, that's another small detail about Unohana's true nature, but I've still got two more. This next one is really small, but let's get into it. This next little moment happens in chapter 299 when the captains first invade Hueco Mundo. Unohana and Isane actually appear right in front of Chad when the Exekiyas were about to execute him and the Arankar he defeated. Well, that's until Unohana forces them to retreat with her mere presence. Now you might not think that this is a huge deal, but the leader of the Exekiyas later fights Rukia and was willing to engage Ichigo in order to stop him from fighting Ukiura. The fact that he was willing to engage Ichigo but not engage Unohana with all his forces backing him up could have clued us in on how powerful Unohana is. Okay, that one was pretty small, but I've still got one more, so let's go. This actually takes place in chapter 382, when Ichigo and Unohana are running through the Garganta to get to fake Karakura Town. While they're running, Ichigo can't make a smooth path because he doesn't have all of his spiritual pressure restored, so Unohana offers to run ahead of him. Ichigo declines at first, but lets her go first after she makes this face. This man Ichigo just got done fighting against second form Ukiura, and he looks more scared of Unohana in this moment than in his entire fight with Ukiura. Mind you, Unohana herself says that Ichigo has 2 times that of a normal captain's spiritual pressure at this point in the story, so for him to be scared of Unohana really says something. Unohana also tells Ichigo exactly what he needs to do perfectly in order to have a chance of defeating Aizen, so the battle IQ of a seasoned fighter is definitely there. So yeah, from pretty much everybody in the Soul Society being scared of Unohana, to the fact that she's the senior of both Shunsui and Ukitake, could have clued us in to her nature of the violent and bloodthirsty first Kenpachi. So that one was fun, but speaking of Kenpachi, I've got some stuff to say about the one and only Kenpachi Zaraki. So in the Thousand Year Blood War, we actually learned that Kenpachi's little pink-haired assistant, Yachiru, was actually his Zanpakuto the whole time. This is a pretty crazy reveal, but there are definitely some hints towards it as the story goes on. The biggest one comes from Yachiru's little backstory that we get as she's caring for Kenpachi after his battle with Ichigo during the Soul Society arc. This flashback takes place in chapter 114 and shows us how Kenpachi and Yachiru met on the outskirts of the Soul Society. You see, Kenpachi actually stole his Zanpakuto from a Soul Reaper that he killed and used it to kill a shit ton of people that thought it would be a good idea to fight him. One day, after Kenpachi finished killing a ton of those people, he was confronted by a little girl. He immediately asks where this little girl came from, and she touches Kenpachi's sword. That's right, the first time that Kenpachi met Yachiru, she was telling him where she truly came from, but Kenpachi just thinks that she's acting like a clueless little kid, and is just surprised that she isn't scared of the giant weapon. Kenpachi then of course names the little girl Yachiru, and the two of them then continue their bond until they were both a part of the Gote 13. So that's a pretty wild thing. We could have known Yachiru's true nature 500 chapters before it was revealed, but there's of course more moments that could have tipped us off. The next tip actually comes much later in the story, and it's during Kenpachi's fight with Gremmy. But before we get to that part, we have to talk about how the battle between the two even began in the first place. So Yachiru and Isane are working on a bunker so they can use it to heal more of their comrades when a little gremlin attacks them. Yachiru fights this little gremlin for a little while until his creator Gremmy quite literally erases him from existence using his mind. Yachiru then tries to fight Gremmy, but he turns her bones into cookies and she immediately crumbles. This is when Kenpachi makes his appearance, and this actually could have helped us figure out this whole thing. You see, Kenpachi is a Zoro-like character who's really bad at directions, but when it comes to Yachiru, he can find his way with no effort. That's a little bit of a reach, but the next thing really should have tipped us off. So while this fight is going on, Gremmy decides to drop a meteor on Kenpachi and the whole Soul Society in an attempt to take them out. This doesn't end up working, however, because Kenpachi ends up calling on his Shikai, Nozarashi, for the first time. As soon as he does this, we actually cut to Yachiru as she's watching the battle, and we see their first interaction again. Kubo really drills home the fact that they both don't have names, and we then get to see the rest of Kenpachi's fight. After he wins this battle, however, Kenny can't find Yachiru anymore, and even sends his men to search for her, even though everybody knows that they'll never be able to find her if he can't. She actually disappears for a really long time until Kenpachi's fight with Valkyrie, where she tells him to use her power properly, and he uses his Bankai for the first time. So believe it or not, the writing was always right in front of us when it came to Yachiru being Kenpachi's Zanpakuto. Just like a lot of things that are foreshadowed in Bleach, it was really subtle, but the crumbs were still there from the beginning. And with that being said, there's only one more thing that I want to talk about in this video, and that's how Komamura's final conversation with Tosen actually kind of foreshadowed his human form and its consequences from the Thousand Year Blood War. So during the Thousand Year Blood War, after the first Quincy invasion, Komamura goes to the leader of the werewolves looking for a way to get stronger. The elder doesn't want to help Komamura at first, but after Komamura beats some sense into him, he decides to tell Komamura about the humanization technique used by their ancestors. In order to perform this technique, a werewolf must tear their heart out and offer it to an ancestor. Komamura does this without hesitation, putting his heart in a little bowl as an offering to his ancestor. Later on in the Blood War, Komamura confronts a Stern Ritter named Bambi. You know, the one that can turn whatever she touches into bombs. The one that was turned into a zombie and creepily preyed on by Giselle. Yeah, that one, now you know. Anyway, they have a great battle where it's revealed that Komamura has turned into his human form and has a hole where his heart once was. Komamura also can't die in this state, so he uses this to his advantage and kills Bambi as a way to get revenge for Yamamoto. Obviously, Bambi wasn't the one to kill Yamamoto, but it was a Quincy that killed him, so this had to feel kinda cathartic. This form is short-lived, however, because as soon as Komamura defeats Bambi, he turns into a wolf and is no longer able to help in the fight against Yuha. He sold his soul for revenge, and this is the result. Would you believe that this was actually foreshadowed in his final words to Tosen? I know I already said that, but let's talk about how the two things are connected. So as we know, Tosen holifies in the fake Karakura Town arc, only for Shuhei to sneak up behind him and stab him in the head. Komamura then says this as Tosen is lying on the ground dying. "I'm not asking you to hate me or to put aside your grudge. Just don't allow your hunger for revenge to change who you are, as with the loss of your friend, to lose you would leave a hole in my heart." This perfectly foreshadows what happens to Komamura during the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. Komamura loses someone important to him, Yamamoto, and allows his hunger for revenge to change who he is. He gets a power-up just like Tosen did, but it quite literally gives him a hole in his heart and leaves him pretty much dead, in a form where he can no longer fight for the revenge he hungers for. Komamura's character arc in the 1,000-Year Blood War made him one of my favorite captains in Bleach. He went a long way from being the guy that I only knew for getting one-shotted by Aizen. And with that, that's all I have to talk about in today's video about Bleach's insane foreshadowing. There are still probably more moments that I could talk about, so if you guys have anything that I'm still missing, please put them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to cover them in a third video. Please join me next time for whatever I post next. Please leave a like and maybe subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye bye.